The last question, I have to pull it up on this, is how should we go about doing strategy and democratizing it? So I have three things I want to touch on, and I'll try and be as brief as I can about them. When we're talking about what we want to, like, doing the struggle, like, we've done a good job of kind of pointing out some things that I have a lot of disdain for. But where are we trying to go with this? Because I tend to get frustrated when we don't actually give any examples of what we could do next and what we could leave here and go and try and do. By the way, thanks everybody for coming out. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that. So one thing that I think is important is I feel like I can learn from a lot of different things. So I read a lot of Marxist stuff. I read the New York Times. I love the Wall Street Journal. I listen to, what was that financial podcast I was on? The one in DC that you always listen to? Marketplace. Oh. Marketplace is on my podcast. I think it's really interesting, and you can learn a lot from the way the capitalists talk about capitalism normally. And so I'm not afraid of, we talked about this last night. I'm not afraid of engaging with those things. My ideas aren't so fragile in me that I'm afraid of what could happen if I actually read what somebody else thought. Like, if I read the Wall Street Journal, I might stop being an anarchist because it's going to make sense to me. Like it's like I'm not afraid of that happening because I actually believe these things. They aren't built on sand. Like I've thought about this as part of very deeply as part of who I am, and the way in which I live my life and the way I interact with people. And so in that way, I think there's two things that I think are really important. One is a historical example, and one is a modern one. And then the last one is just an idea for next. So historically, I when we talk about social transformation, I think about, like, it's a really heavy, big thing. So I like to look at anti-colonial struggles because I think there's an idea, even if they're flawed and there's mistakes made and things go wrong, at least they have to figure out that's an actual avenue where people are like, we have no infrastructure and we're colonized, so we're going to have to kick these people out and come up with what we're going to put in place after. So they actually have to come up with the whole thing that we're talking about has to be done, and they may not do it the way we do it, but I think it's interesting to study. So in Guinea-Bissau, there was a group called the PIAGC. It was Amilcar Cabral, who people may have heard of and read about. And an interesting thing is that they could have beat the Portuguese militarily very, very early on. Like, the military part wasn't the problem, but they said, we can kick the Portuguese out of Guinea-Bissau, and what'll be left is nothing, because we have nothing to replace it with. We don't have the institutions, the health care. We have nothing to give people if we were to get rid of them. We are dependent on them because they give us something. It may be essentially slavery, wage slavery / slavery. But without it, we don't have anything, actually. There's nothing we can trade. We have no relationships with anybody else. There's nothing here. So they set about what would it look like if we had to come up with those institutions pretty quick. How do we do this? And so they said, well, what would we need? Well, there's no roads, so every so often, there needs to be a community, like a small healthcare clinic with some nurses and a doctor. And they drew a map, like, okay, so we need this many. And so we need, I don't remember the actual number, but for the sake of argument, we could say we need 200 nurses to pull this off, 40 doctors, maybe 3 people who can do some irrigation stuff with water because there isn't much water flowing through the middle of this thing. How are we going to pull this off? Well, walk into a village and we say, your village and your community is going to need health care, right? Yes. You want it, yes. Great, 5 of you stand up. You're going, what? 5 of you stand up, you're going to be nurses. If you're dedicated to actually making this happen, then stand up and do the fucking work. Like, you're going to do it. You're going to go and become a nurse, and you're going to come back to your community, and you're going to offer that. You're not going to kind of learn how to do a few of the things. You're going to actually acquire the skills in order to replace these colonizers. Like, we have to have these skills. It's important. And this is all written up in the book, No Fist is Big Enough to Hide the Sky. The way they went about doing this. And then we need a doctor. Somebody's going to have to stand up and go to med school. That's just the reality of it. Sorry. And people were jumping at the chance to actually be able to contribute in a real way to the transformation of their society. And it's really interesting that we live in a place where you can go to nursing school relatively simply. It costs money, etc., but it is possible. And we aren't using these opportunities to create our own institutions. We could take the knowledge back to our communities and do what we actually want to do with it. And the other thing I want to talk about is the Revolutionary Autonomous Communities Project in LA, which I had the honor and privilege of hanging out with for a day, just one day, but keeping in contact with them pretty regularly. So the Revolutionary Autonomous Communities, for people who don't know, is a project, is an idea based in the Los Angeles area, in the city of LA, where a group of native LA people said, what are things that we see that people need? And what do we think that people would want? And they said, well, we need to come up, and one of the main things, so they run a few programs. One is the Cop Watch LA stuff comes out of the same crowd of people in the same institution of the Revolutionary Autonomous Communities, because policing in LA is like crazy, and cops can do whatever the fuck they want like they can anywhere else. But they were trying to create an accountability process for how they were going to deal with that, especially around immigration, being close to the border. And another thing, the thing that I got to spend a day with that was the most fascinating was their food program. And they modeled it on the Panther idea of how a food program would work. We're not going to cook food and tell you to come eat what we cook for you, because that's not a relationship where we're fostering camaraderie and comradeship and independence and dignity. There's no dignity in that. We're cooking something so you can come eat it because you apparently can't cook for yourself. We're instead going to talk to other farmers who are in this community, explain what the project is, solicit massive amounts of donation. Literally the wall of food that people were I was helping unload boxes, we were doing this, and the wall of food stretched like this whole wall, and stacked 6 boxes high and 2 wide of food donations. And I just stood there, no idea what to say about the amount of food. People were just pulling up, these farmers, and they were like, we're also members of this community. There's mainly Latino people with African American people also. We understand the plight of people. We understand that there's an economic crisis. We understand people don't have food. This is all of our excess. Give it away. So you line up, and the volunteers who are actually community members and who actually take from the program, they're founders of the program. They have ownership over the program. They direct the program. Sit down and actually go through the food and create food boxes. And you come and you get a box of food that has rice and beans and breads and vegetables and fruits and etc. And it's a healthy box of food. And you get to take it home and cook it yourself, because that's what you should be allowed to do. You shouldn't have to come eat what we give you. And I thought that was powerful on so many levels, because I watched these people come up and get the food, and the conversations just that they were having with people about, that I was getting to have with people who were just getting a box of food. And they would say, this is, part of our community, this thing we support. The cops ever basically fucked with this, we would get involved. They've said, and I was like, do the cops ever come by? We're in MacArthur Park. It's on the border of where the gentrification is, it's like the hotbed, right? It's like the place where the American Apparel is opening right down the street, basically. Literally, not figuratively, not literally. People were like, no, we will defend this. And the cops know that this is not just a bunch of punks who they can arrest. This is moms, and there's going to be a massive upheaval if people start fucking with people who are just poor moms and dads and whatever. And this is important to us, and this is important to survival. And they're on some level, we explained to them, there's nowhere else we can actually get the food. And they backed off. And I was like, that's fascinating that they were able to accomplish this. But when I asked one of the main organizers about, how does this relate? How do the people that get food and the people who volunteer in the program relate to the ideas that you say are important, to anarchism, to, horizontal politics, to feminism, to anti-racism, etc.? They said, well, what's interesting is we created a space where people could be, and we knew they would have our support. And soon women were interacting with men and saying, you're being lazy and not carrying your load. You're standing over there talking while we're preparing the boxes, and then you're talking about all the work you did. We expect you to do as much as we do from now on. And and we supported them when we said they're right. We need to all do an equal share of the work, but you need to be a part of this as much as they are. And this has created a space where people now interact and talk about everything that's going on in the program. And to me, that, and the important thing, and I asked, I was like, what makes this so, what about this is, the thing about this blows my mind is that, I don't know how you guys came up with just doing this, and, where did this come from? They're like, here's the thing. We were born in LA. Some of our families have been here since before this was part of the US. We're going to live in LA. We're never going to move more than 4 miles from where we were born, and we're probably going to die within about 5 miles of where we were born. That's the radius and the of where we're going to exist for our life on this earth. Knowing that there's no option but to figure out solutions to our problems. We're not moving to Portland. He's like, we're not moving to Portland. We're not doing that thing where you go somewhere else. We're going to stay here, and we're never leaving because this is home and this is ours. And we refuse to give it to them. We're not letting them have this from us. This is ours. We'll fight for it. And I was just like, this is the work. This is what people are doing that just really gives me some hope.